Hello folks, and welcome back. Today we're going to be talking about a kind of confusing lesson, but a pretty interesting one. This is called completing the square. We're going to skip over the start thinking just so we can talk about how we develop this. If we were to try to solve x squared is equal to 16, what would we do? Well, we'd take the square root of both sides. And our solutions would be x is equal to not just positive 4, because 4 times 4 is equal to 16, but also negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 4 also equals 16. So the square root of 16 is plus or minus 4. We can expand this a step and say, okay, now we have some sort of binomial here that is squared that we don't know the answer for what x is. What we can still do, we still have a square here, so we can take the square root of both sides. And taking the square root will cancel out the square, so we'll be left with x plus 2 is equal to plus or minus 3. From here we could split this up, so we could say x plus 2 is equal to positive 3, and x plus 2 could be equal to negative 3, and then substitute these back in, or continue solving for these. So we could say subtract 2, this would get us to x is equal to 1, or we subtract 2 and we say x is equal to minus 5. And those would be our two answers here. We could substitute those both back in. 1 plus 2, or 3 squared, would be 9. And negative 5 plus 2 squared would be negative 3 squared, so that would get us back to positive 9. Let's expand this a step. Now that we know this, we have some equation here where we have x squared plus 6x is equal to something unknown. It's equal to 7. But what if we were to fill this in? If we were to fill this in with, say, the number 9, then all of a sudden when we go to factor this, we're looking for factors of 9 that add up to 6. That would be 3 and 3. So this would become x plus 3 squared. And so this is our major step for completing the square, is we're going to add a number. That way we can complete converting this down into a square. Now let's go ahead and go through the steps for what we do to complete the square. The first step for completing the square is going to be divide everything by a and then subtract your constant to the other side. So in this case, we don't have any a to divide by. We just divide by 1, but we would subtract 15. So step 1 would leave us with x squared plus 8x is equal to minus 15. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to add b over 2 squared to each side. So we're going to add b over 2 squared to each side. Now, why b over 2 squared? Well, it's going to allow us to turn this into a completed square, or allow us to factor this into a completed square. So what's b over 2? 8 over 2 is going to be 4. Squared is going to be 16, so we're going to add 16 to both sides. So we get x squared plus 8x plus 16 will be equal to minus 15 plus 16. We have to add it to both sides because what we do to one side, we have to do to the other. Step 3 is going to be factor the left-hand side. And let's go through this and look, what is the factors of this side? What factors of 16 add up to make 8? That's going to be 4 and 4. So this becomes x plus 4 squared. And typically when we factor, we're just going to say this is x plus or x minus whatever the square root of our constant is. And this will be equal to what? Negative 15 plus 16, that'll be positive 1. Step 4 is going to be take the square root. So we're going to take the square root here. We're going to say x plus 4 is going to be equal to the square root of 1. That's going to be positive or negative 1. And then step 5 is going to be solve. So now we have two equations that we're going to split up so that we have x plus 4 is equal to positive 1 and x plus 4 is equal to negative 1. Then we just solve, so we subtract 4 from both sides to see x could be equal to minus 3 or x could be equal to minus 5. And if we put these both back into this equation, we would see this works out. Minus 3 squared, 9, plus 8 times 3, which would give us a negative number, plus 15 would equal 0. Let's go ahead and try a harder example. We're going to do this one now. First thing we want to do is divide by a. So we're going to divide everything by 2. And we're going to be left with x squared plus 6x plus 3 is equal to 0. Then we're going to subtract 3 over to the other side. So we're left with x squared plus 6x is equal to negative 3. What do we do from here? Well, we're going to add b over 2 squared to each side. b is 6, so b over 2 squared is going to be 6 over 2 squared, or 3 squared, so this will be 9. We're going to add 9 to both sides. And then we're going to factor. What factors of 9 add up to 6? Well, that's going to be 3 and 3, or the square root of our constant. So this will become x plus 3 times x plus 3, or x plus 3 squared, is equal to 6. That was step 3. We factored the left side. Now we're going to take the square root to say that x plus 3 will be equal to plus or minus the square root of 6. Now we can try to reduce 6, right? But when we divide by 3, we're left with 2. When we divide by 2, we're left with 1. So we can't reduce this, meaning that our answer is going to be x is equal to minus 3 plus or minus the square root of 6. I know this is confusing, so let's go ahead and do a couple of baby steps. We're going to start by figuring out what we need to add to both sides. For example, what do we need to add so that we can go through the next step and complete the square for this one? Well, we want to add b over 2 squared. Or so we're going to add 8 over 2, 4 squared. So we're going to add 16 to both sides. What would we add to problem 2 to make sure that we can complete the square? Well, for problem 2, we're going to take 9, we're going to divide it by 2, and then we're going to square it. So b over 2 squared is going to be equal to 9 over 2 squared. And remember, when we're squaring a fraction, we square the top and the bottom. So we would add 81 over 4. Next, let's go ahead and work through getting an equation ready for completing the square and determining what number that would be. So write this out in the step before we add anything and tell me what number we would add. So to add these together, what would we do? Well, we would move 2 over to the other side, and we'd have x squared plus 10x is equal to 2. What would we add? Well, we would add b over 2 squared, or 10 over 2 squared. 5 squared is going to be plus 25. If we were to continue from here, this would become x plus the square root of 25, so 5 squared would be equal to 2 plus 25, or 27. From here, we would square root, and we would continue to solve. I'll walk us through this next one. How do we get this ready? Well, we're going to divide everything by 3. So this will become x squared plus 5 over 3x plus 8 over 3 is equal to 0. Now we're going to subtract the 8 over 3 over. So this would become x squared plus 5 over 3x is equal to minus 8 over 3. Then all we do is we multiply b by 1/2 and square it. So what we would add to both sides would be 5 over 6 squared, or 25 over 36. Don't worry about solving these types. We won't be going too far into those. Now, let's actually have you walk through a problem. So let's have you go ahead and try to go through the steps to solve this. Remember, step 1, divide by a and get c over to the other side. Step 2 is to add b over 2 squared, then complete the square and finish solving. So what would our values for x be for this first problem? For this first problem, we already have c over on the right, and we don't have any a, meaning the next thing we have to do is we have to figure out what 12 over 2 squared would be. That's just going to be the same thing as 6 squared, or we're going to add 36 to both sides. So this would become x squared plus 12x plus 36, and that will be equal to 64 plus 36. So we're going to add this right-hand side together. 64 plus 36 will give us 100. And this side is going to become x plus the square root of 36, or 6 squared. From here, we're going to take the square root, so this will become x plus 6 if we take the square root, and that's going to be equal to the square root of 100. It's not just 10, it's not just negative 10, it's plus or minus 10. And then from here, all we're going to do is we're going to split this up into two different equations. So what we're going to do is we're going to split this up into x plus 6 is equal to 10, and x plus 6 is equal to negative 10. And then we just solve. So we subtract 6, we get x is equal to 4, and x is going to be equal to negative 10 minus 6, or negative 16. Let's go ahead and try this one as well. Try to walk through your steps to figure out what x will be equal to. For this one, the first step is going to be subtract your constant over to the other side. So we're going to get x squared plus 6x is equal to minus 8. What's our next step going to be? Well, we're going to add b over 2 squared. What is b over 2? So we're looking for 6 over 2 squared, or 3 squared, and we'll add that to both sides. So we're going to make this x squared plus 6x plus 9 is equal to minus 8 plus 9. Our right-hand side, minus 8 plus 9, is going to give us 1. And what about this left-hand side? Well, factors of 9 that add up to 6 are going to be plus 3 and plus 3. So this will be x plus 3 squared is equal to 1. Or from here, what do we do? Well, we're going to take the square root of both sides. So our square root and our square will cancel. Square root of 1 is going to be plus or minus 1. And we're left with just x plus 3 is equal to plus or minus 1. From here, we're going to split this up into 2. So we get x plus 3 is equal to positive 1, and x plus 3 is equal to negative 1. And then we just solve. So we say x is equal to minus 2, and x is equal to minus 4. Now this is a new topic, and I know it's confusing. All we have to do is we have to remember, get your constant over, divide by your leading term coefficient, and then add b over 2 squared. Those are the key steps. Right. And folks, that is all for this lesson. All we need to remember are these 5 steps. We go all the way back up here. Divide by a, bring c to the other side. Add b over 2 squared to each side. Factor, and then square root and solve. That's all there is to this lesson. So go ahead and try out the homework.